And this was the man whose name is lost to antiquity, who mentioned Buttercup to the Count. The land of Florin was set between where Sweden and Germany would eventually settle. This was before Europe. In theory, it was ruled by King Lotharon and his second wife, the Queen. But in fact, the king was barely hanging on, could only rarely tell day from night, and basically spent his time muttering. He was very old, every organ in his body had long since betrayed him, and most of his important decisions regarding Florin had a certain arbitrary quality that bothered many of the leading citizens. Prince Humperdinck acting huh, Prince Humperdinck actually ran things. If there had been a Europe, he would have been the most powerful man in it. Even as it was, nobody within 1,000 miles wanted to mess with him. The Count was Prince Humperdinck's only confidant. His last name was Rugen, but no one needed to use it. He was the only count in the country, the title having been bestowed by the prince as a birthday present some years before, the happening taking place naturally at one of the countess's parties. The countess was considerably younger than her husband. All of her clothes came from Paris. This was after Paris. And she had superb taste. This was after taste, too, but only just. And since it was such a new thing, and since the Countess was the only lady in all Florin to possess it, is it any wonder she was the leading hostess of the land? Eventually, her passion for fabric and face paint caused her to settle permanently in Paris, where she ran the only salon of international consequence. For now, she busied herself with simply sleeping on silk, eating on gold, and being the single most feared and admired woman in Florinese history. If she had figure faults, her clothes concealed them. If her face was less than divine, it was hard to tell when she got done applying substances. This was before glamour, but if it hadn't been for the ladies like the Countess, there would never have been a need for its invention. In sum, the Rugens were couple of the week in Florin and had been for many years. Quick, quick, come! Buttercup's father stood in the farmhouse staring out the window. Why? This from the mother. She gave away nothing when it came to obedience. The father came a quick finger point. Look! You look. You know. Okay. You look. You know how. Buttercup's parents did not have exactly what you might call a happy marriage. All they ever dreamed of was leaving each other. Buttercup's father shrugged and went back to the window. Ah, he said after a while, and a little later, again, ah. Buttercup's mother glanced up briefly from her cooking. Such riches, Buttercup's father said. Glorious. Buttercup's mother hesitated, then put her spoon down. This was after stew, but so was everything. When the first man first clambered from the slime and made his first home on land, what he had for supper that very first night was stew. The heart swells at the magnificence, Buttercup's father muttered very loudly. What exactly is it, Dumpling? Buttercup's mother wanted to know. You look, you know how, was all he replied. This was their third-party spat of the day. This was long after spats. And he was behind 13-20, but he had made up a lot of his distance since lunch, when it was 17-2 against him. Donkey, the mother said, and came over to the window. A moment later, she was going, ah, right along with him. They stood there, the two of them, tiny and odd. From setting the dinner table, Buttercup watched them. They must be going to meet Prince Humperdinck someplace, Buttercup's mother said. The father nodded. Hunting, that's what the prince does. How lucky we are to have seen them pass by, Buttercup's mother said, and she took her husband's hand. The old man nodded. Now I can die. She glanced at him. Don't. Her tone was surprisingly tender. And probably she sensed how important he really was to her, because when he did die, 2 years further on, she went right after, and most of the people who knew her agreed it was the sudden lack of opposition that undid her. Buttercup came close and stood behind them, staring over them, and soon she was gasping too, because the Count and the Countess and all their pages and soldiers and servants and courtiers and champions and carriages were passing by the cart track at the front of the farm. The three stood in silence as the procession moved forward. Buttercup's father was a tiny mutt of a man who had always dreamed of living like the Count. He had once been 2 miles from where the Count and Prince had been hunting, and until this moment that had been the high point of his life. He was a terrible farmer, and not much of a husband either. There wasn't really much in this world he excelled at, and he could never quite figure out how he happened to sire his daughter. But he knew, deep down, that it must have been some kind of wonderful mistake, the nature of which he had no intention of investigating. How long have I been reading? Oh, what is that? 7 minutes? Okay. Buttercup's mother was a gnarled shrimp of a woman, thorny and worrying, who had always dreamed of somehow just once being popular like the Countess was said to be. She was a terrible cook, and even more limited housekeeper. How Buttercup slid from her womb was, of course, beyond her, but she had been there when it happened, and that was enough for her. Buttercup herself, standing half a head over her parents, still holding the dinner dishes, still smelling of horse, only wished that the great procession wasn't quite so far away, so she could see if the Countess's clothes really were all that lovely. As if in answer to her question, the procession turned and began entering the farm. Here? Buttercup's father managed. My goodness, why? Buttercup's mother whirled on him. Did you forget to pay your taxes? This was after taxes, but everything is after taxes. Taxes were here even before stew. Even if I did, they wouldn't need all that to collect them. And he gestured toward the front of his farm, where now the Count and Countess and all their pages and soldiers and servants and courtiers and champions and carriages were coming closer and closer. What could they want to ask me about? He said. Go see, Buttercup's mother told him. You go, please. No, you, please. We'll both go. And they both went, trembling. Cows, the Count said. When they reached his golden carriage, I would like to talk about your cows. He spoke from inside, his dark face darkened by shadow. My cows? Buttercup's father asked. Yes, you see, I'm thinking of starting a little dairy of my own, and since your cows are known throughout the land as being Floren's finest, I thought I might pry your secrets from you. My cows, Buttercup's father managed to repeat, hoping he was not going mad, because the truth was, and he knew it well. He had terrible cows. For years, nothing but complaints from the people in the village. If anyone else had milk to sell, he would have been out of business in a minute. Now, granted, things had improved since the farm boy had come to slave for them. No question the farm boy had certain skills, and the complaints were quite non-existent now. But that didn't make his the finest cows in Florin. Still, you didn't argue with the Count. Buttercup's father turned to his wife. "What would you say my secret is, my dear?" he asked. "Howdy." "Oh, there are so many," she said. She was no dummy, not when it came to the quality of her livestock. "You two are childless, are you?" the Count asked them. "No, sir," the mother answered. "Then let me see her," the Count went on. "Perhaps she will be quicker with her answers than her parents." "Buttercup," the father called, turning. "Come out, please." "How did you know we had a daughter?" Buttercup's mother wondered. "A guess. I assumed it had to be one or the other. Some days I'm luckier than—" He simply stopped talking because Buttercup moved into view, hurrying from the house to her parents. The Count left the carriage. Gracefully, he moved to the ground and stood very still. He was a big man with black hair and black eyes and great shoulders and a black cape and gloves. "Curtsy, dear," Buttercup's mother whispered. Buttercup did her best, and the Count could not stop looking at her. Okay, it's not as easy for me to see the timer, but that is 12 minutes. So this is apparently the part where the Count sees Buttercup for the first time.